Ladies and gentlemen, good evening, and welcome to this marquee event of the Hong Kong International Literary Festival. My name is Shalini Mitani, and I'm a board director of the Literary Festival, as well as a family member of the home. I want to thank my cousin Aron and his wife Laura. May I have a round of applause for them? I would also like to thank my aunt, Auntie Laila, wherever she is, and the entire Harilela family for making this beautiful event possible. Tonight's a special evening, and everyone here tonight has contributed to the success of the festival. And this year's festival has been a success. As you will all know, the mission of the festival is to inspire the joy of reading by bringing the world's writers and stories to Hong Kong's diverse communities. And we're so happy to be back face to face. Many not know that we have a youth and children part of the festival, known as the Young Readers Festival, which motivates young people to engage in all aspects of the written word, improving English language, and nurturing an informed global outlook, something that we all need. This year, we've had over 250 events with 70 authors. Our Young Readers Festival has had over 25 authors who have engaged with over 17,000 children, and those children come from all backgrounds in Hong Kong. The festival is unique, and I myself have been coming to the festival for a very, very long time. The festival offers dialogue, entertainment, and perspective, all so necessary for our creativity, innovation, and for Hong Kong. Tonight you will hear from a number of people. You will hear from Aron, who is joined by Jonathan Kaufman, who is a Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter, editor, and author of The Last Kings of Shanghai, a book that I love and I have gifted. We are joined also by Vaudine England, who is the author of the book that you will hear more about tonight. The book is called Hari Harilela Made in Hong Kong. The book is about my late great-uncle, who is Aron's father. And for those of you who've asked the question tonight how I'm related to Aron, I shall now share that. So my mum and Aron are first cousins, or Aron's dad and my granddad are brothers. I hope that makes sense. So he might be my uncle, I'm not sure. Tonight, courtesy, compliments of the Hong Kong International Literary Festival, who will all leave with a copy of the book. And the author, Vaudine and Aron, have agreed to sign books for everyone. You'll only get one copy each. And so after the talk, if you could make your way here, they will graciously sign the book for you. And now may I hand over to you. Thank you.
Before we start, does anybody want some wine, some champagne? We're an Indian household. We like to feed and some people.
You see why I love this job.
Thank you for opening your home to us, and thank you both for sharing the incredible story that's told in this book. I think it's because your family is so well known in Hong Kong, so established. It's hard, I think, sometimes to imagine you've always been here, this has always been part of Hong Kong, but in fact, the origins of your family and the journey that they took that brought them to Hong Kong is actually quite fascinating. And I was wondering if maybe both of you could start by talking about where the family started and where they were before they finally ended up in Hong Kong and started building their reputation and fortune here.
You and me.
Go ahead.
Oh, I see. You were right that the Harilelas were very well known, and you think they're an integral part of Hong Kong. But like just about everybody who has been instrumental in making Hong Kong, they of course came from somewhere else. In this case, from Hyderabad, Sindh, which then was in India, now would be in Pakistan, and it's Aron's grandfather, Hari's father, who first was part of, what I love about doing these books, you end up learning all sorts of things you never knew. Part of this whole kind of Sindhi diaspora around the turn of the beginning of the 19th century, out of Sindh into all sorts of places really from the Middle East to the Far East and so on, more in the late 19th century than the early. Often in the beginning selling sort of trinkets to traders. Oh, sorry, should I put the mic more on my face? Yeah. Okay. And as we will see in the Harilela family, moving into the whole fabric industry. But in the beginning, and this was what I found really interesting, how all kinds of immediately human stories connect to much larger things going on in the world. Obviously, by the late 19th century, you had the beginning of sort of mass tourism. I mean, we think it's recent, but it was then. And so Sindhis were selling things to tourists going through Suez. They were selling them all the way through Southeast Asia. And all these shops that used to be, and none of us here are old enough to remember this, I hope, that used to be all through Central, Wyndham Street, Queen's Road, Pedder Street, and around, Indian fabric shops selling absolutely fabulous suits. Taj Mahal, Wassamul. These were huge sort of family conglomerates that had evolved out of Sindh, had moved right around the world. I mean, they had bases in the most obscure, amazing places in Africa and whatever. And Aron's grandfather first started in Singapore, working in the Wassamul shop there. And it was a wonderful moment when we could find a picture of the street where the shop used to be. And then, as so often, you know, you work for a couple of years, you're basically living above the shop. There's a bunch of, you're one of these guys who's trying to bring people like you, Barbara, into the shop to buy some gorgeous fabric. And then he moved from Singapore to Shanghai, worked in Shanghai for a bit, until then arriving in Guangzhou, Xiamen, and there was a whole, I mean, who knew? There was a whole Sindhi community there. There was a gang of traders who were again dealing with fabrics and trinkets and so on from around the world. And that was all going extremely well. And Hari talks about this moment where, you know, they were living in a kind of luxury on Xiamen Island. And then, of course, the Great Depression hits in 1929. And that's when the family, by then I think just 4 brothers, wasn't it? So mum, dad and 4 sons think, oh, it's all falling apart in Xiamen, we'll go to Hong Kong, where they had absolutely nothing. I mean, the thought was that there was going to be a brother with a business, but it didn't work out. So they're here as this family with kids, no money, in one tiny apartment, one room in Sham Shui Po, and from there they had to try to start, I mean, they went from that to this. So it was quite a fantastic story. So I think it's your turn, Aron, to do some talking. You can't make me do it all.
So I think what's very interesting is that if you look at India, in those days, obviously it was a state as opposed to one country. A lot of the Gujaratis would move to East Africa, Kenya. You'd see obviously the rise of Gandhi and a lot of Gujaratis there. There are a lot of Gujaratis still in East Africa. Whereas in China and Asia, Hong Kong, less Southeast Asia, but in China, you would see a network of Sindhis. So from where we come from is a province called Sindh, which now Karachi is Karachi, Sindh in Pakistan. Partition happened in August 1947, but there was a network of Sindhis who basically said, I have a son, it was the sons in those days, who need some work, and it was the mother of the sister of the cousin of the brother of the 72nd cousin who said, well, I have a shop in Singapore, they can come and work with us. And the journey to go from Hyderabad, Sindh, all the way to Singapore was not only long, but it was certainly treacherous. Now you're talking about young boys and who would have to go back to India to eventually get married, to find wives, to have their children, because Sindhis would marry Sindhis, Gujaratis would marry Gujaratis, etc. So it was a bold move in those days. And if you think about Sindh and Hyderabad, Sindh, it's on the Indian and as well as the Arabian Sea. The amount of sea trade that used to happen there, they would bring all those trinkets, all those curiosities, all the interesting things from India, and actually bring them through. So you would see 18-year-old boys going with massive pieces of luggage, not knowing whether they could sell them, how they could sell them, how much they could sell them, and whether they would sell them, taking these courageous voyages. And that's how my paternal grandfather ended up in Singapore, and eventually, as Vaudine had mentioned, moved to Shanghai, to Xiamen, and then eventually to Hong Kong.
When your grandfather is in Singapore, something happens that it seems to me is a real turning point, and maybe to make all of us feel better about our own family dysfunctions and quarrels. Could you talk a little bit about why Harilela is actually not the original family name, and what led to that change?
Yes, so when I went to boarding school in England, people would say to me, that's not a very Indian name. So you look at my face, I'm Indian, I'm certainly, right? There's no question about that. When my paternal grandfather he was very close to his mother, and when she passed away, the Hindu tradition is that you cannot eat until you cremate the body. He happened to be traveling back to Hyderabad, Sindh, when his mother passed away, and it was a matter of 36, 48 hours, something like that, where they cremated the body of his mother, and he was very upset at that. And so he said, you know what, I'm done. I live in Singapore, and I'm going to take half the name of my mother, which was Hari, and he took the Hari, and half the name of my father, which was Laila Ram, and he took the Laila. He put them together. And that's why when you hear Harilela, there's only one family in the world, which basically is here in Hong Kong. Most Sindhi names end in ANI. And we were originally Mir Chandani, but we became Harilela when my paternal grandfather took half his mother's name and half his father's name, and started this family.
Yeah, so he was just incredibly disappointed that the rest of his family hadn't waited for him to get back to Sindh in time to see his mother before she was buried and everything. So yeah, he never looked back, he never went back, I think. And I guess that's probably an important part also of the migrant drive. There's nothing back there for you, so you are going to do whatever it takes to make it work in your new life. And I think that must have been a factor for him. And I mean, it was just, yeah, he was extremely unhappy, but I think the result was good.
Vaudine, could you as the author talk about the sort of unique circumstances of this book? Often when we're trying to write books and biographies, you're tracking down letters or individual comments that might have been made. But in a sense, you had kind of a treasure trove here to work from.
Yeah, and actually, I remember when Aron and I were in the office together, and he was saying, well, there's a few pages by my father. I think he's written a bit of a memoir here. It's on this USB stick. And remember, we were trying to open the USB stick and find out what was on it, and then suddenly, oh my God, there's 476 pages. So, I mean, some of it was sort of lists, I mean, one of the things I really grew to love about Hari, and the thing is, when you write a book about someone, you feel like, you know them, even though obviously he had already died. But he was almost entirely uneducated. He made an incredible effort to learn English, Cantonese, whatever other language he needed to know for business, Japanese for a while. And he took lessons in his late 30s. He hired a tutor from LaSalle, was it, or from one of the other schools here, to come and help him improve his writing, to write in English. I mean, this was a guy who was already on government committees and doing all kinds of things, but he knew he had to improve. And meanwhile, while sort of building and running a conglomerate and possibly even more complexly a family, he also was writing, and he would do an hour or two at his desk every morning up here before sort of going out into the world every day. And what's special about it, I mean, first of all, that it's in his voice. I mean, there are other writers in this room, you know how important that is, that you have your subject in his voice. It makes all the difference. Whether it's perfect grammar or not is really not important. But the second point is, much though I love archives and find them one of the most important things in human civilization, poor people don't make it into archives. I mean, they might in a census or in some sort of general way, but often they're missed out. And certainly in early Hong Kong, you don't suddenly have a whole file on the Harilelas from the 1920s and 30s. You know, they were not yet on the map, so they're not yet in writing, except for what Hari himself remembered and wrote down. So he is, I mean, you can say on the one side, the BBC bit in me says, oh my God, it's a one-source story. You know, it's Hari talking about his memories about his parents, and of course it's through his eyes. There's not much way, there's not many ways of sort of checking that. I could check all kinds of things and learn immense amounts about this wonderful Sindhi network all over the place. I could ask other people whose parents were around at the same time, and I could work out what made sense and what didn't. But having Hari's story in his voice was indeed, as you say, a treasure trove. And I think it is the most important bit of the book, really. Don't you?
That's a big thank you, Vaudine. That's a big lead on. But there were some interesting times. We've been talking, my father had written about a property transaction, but we went to the company's registrar and we saw the price of the transaction was minusculely off. Yeah. The year of the transaction was a year or two off, but he had spent a lot of time every day writing diaries, and probably the last 8 odd years of his life spending time compiling his diaries. I'm really reluctant to do this, but there's an excerpt in the book
which he's going to read.
That I'm going to read, which is my father's own memoirs, and I'll not read all of it. I won't read the whole book to you.
Life's too short.
So this is about when they were moving to Hong Kong. My father was younger than 10. His brother was about 10 or 12, and they were outside the barracks, the UK barracks, opening their wares, a suitcase, razor blades, soap, boxer shorts, anything that they could get their hands on to sell, in the baking sun. And these are young boys. I mean, we all have children. We can't imagine them under 10, under the baking sun, selling things. But I'll just read you a bit, and there's quite a funny thing about a bicycle. So finally somebody said to us, why not try to sell the things to the British Army, stationed at Shantou Post Barracks? So we got some goods, such as singlets, shorts, socks, and other items of daily use, such as soaps, toothbrushes, etc., on consignment from nearby factories, and put them into 2 large suitcases and took a bus with our father to the barracks. Outside the barracks there was a large gate with barbed wire, and no one was allowed to go in. At the gate, there was an army guard who would not allow anyone to enter without a pass. Our father always joined us, as he gave us strength and courage. As we came near, and we're talking about little boys here, right? So as we came near the barracks, we were very scared to see the high iron mesh gate over the 8 feet high at the entrance. We did not know where to sit. As we got nearer, we saw 2 burly army officers marching near towards the gate, and it was closed. His English is, you know, we tidied bits up, but his English was never very perfect. We did not go very near to the gate, but stayed a few feet away and sat on the floor, and opened our suitcases displaying the goods. As the soldiers passed by and in and out of the barracks, they looked at our goods. We were very quiet, and we were looking down, as we did not dare to look at the soldiers marching near the gate. We were afraid that they may tell us to go, but we were small kids with an elderly man and looked scared, so they did not bother us. We did not make any sales on the first day, as when the soldiers wanted to buy, they wanted us to reduce our prices, as bargaining was considered normal in those days. But our father told us to stay at one price and no bargaining. And I'm just gonna, we told our father that all the people in Hong Kong bargained, and that it was the custom of the Chinese people to bargain. But my father stood firm, so we did not make any sale, and it was very disheartening, and we came home empty-handed. On the next day, we went there at noon and sat at the same place. This time, we had made a sale towards 4 p.m. I mean, how he remembers this time, I think it may not be precise. I don't think he had a watch in this. But as we had a very good selection of merchandise, and some of the soldiers who dealt with us a day earlier knew that we had one price, so they bought. But most of them did not buy from us, as they were used to bargaining. So we used to open our suitcases and sit outside the gate. As the army personnel walked in and out, we used to solicit and try to sell our items to them. At the age of 90, when I look back, I recall sitting outside the fence of the British Army barracks back in the year 1932 with my ailing father and elder brother, Dada George. I was thinking of my 2 years in Canton when we were fairly well off, and then suddenly finding myself sitting on the ground with a hot sun blazing overhead, wondering what had happened so that from a luxury life, suddenly we were hawking outside barracks. Then I'm just going to fast forward a bit. Our father, Dada George, and I used to go to the barracks with 2 heavy bags, and the bags kept on becoming heavier and heavier as the business grew. In the end, we took 2 bags each. As the bags got heavier and heavier, we decided to buy a bicycle, which was very useful. As our business grew, if we needed some goods, instead of saying we'll supply them the next day, I used to ride and bring them from home, and it was working beautifully. I became the best bicycle rider and used to take heavy load and ride like an expert. After many months and maybe a year, I rushed back home to get more goods, and as usual put my bicycle down, as there was a hawker who used to sell cigarettes, and he used to look after my bike. But one day he was busy and I came down and found that my bicycle was not there. I asked him about it, and he said it was there a minute ago. Apparently it was stolen right under his nose. Poor fellow, he felt sorry and nobody could do anything about it. This was the worst tragedy for me. As a young boy, it was to lose a fortune. Although the bicycle cost $11, that was a fortune in those days, and for days and months I could not get over it. It was Dad who consoled me by saying that the money that we'd lost was not meant for us. We'd made far too much, so we had to return it where it belonged. I couldn't understand that philosophy.
I'm wondering.
That's a good summary of our.
I'm wondering, what was it like for you to kind of read your father, to hear your father's voice through this memoir and diary? Did it stir memories for you, or was it a side of him maybe you didn't know? What was surprising?
No, I was actually very close to my father. We spent many conversations together. I sat in the office with him. I was there when he was actually compiling his diaries, writing his memoirs. I read a lot of them. I didn't read all of them, but he had told me these stories over time. I spent a lot of time with my father, actually, so reading them now even stirs back a lot of those memories. But a lot of the stories in this book, Vaudine and I had discussed, were the important stories to him. As Vaudine said, it was 476 pages, or something like that he had written. So this is certainly not all of them. We picked the ones that he had told me, and he told my sisters, and to my mother. Vaudine and I'd certainly sat with my mother a lot. You had sat with my mother a lot, and it was those important ones that we decided to put in the book.
You know, it's interesting when we think about entrepreneurship today. We think of individuals, right? Mark Zuckerberg, Richard Branson, Jeff Bezos, people who sort of go out into the world and make their way. But this is so much a family story. And I wonder if there's something also in Hong Kong where so many of the, not only fortunes, but impact has been made by families. The Kadoorie family that I've written about, Chinese families, obviously. Can you talk a little bit about the family aspect? But also, did that connect somehow or succeed in Hong Kong in a unique way, or said something about Hong Kong culture?
That's you, Vaudine. I just read it all. I need some wine now.
I would take that back to the fact that everybody here is some kind of migrant, with possibly not much to their name, except the family. But of course the Harilela family is quite exceptional. You have all these brothers. And at first I was kind of puzzled. I thought, hang on, Hari's the leader, I guess he's the oldest son. No, he's the second son. And so that, of course, was initially confusing. George, referred to here as Dada George, is this sort of hugely loved character who clearly was a sort of spiritual, emotional touchstone for all sorts of people in the family through generations. But he clearly was not the businessman. I mean, that was Hari. And Hari's other brothers each end up having a different role in different parts of the business, all of them important. But the thing about Hari, he had some kind of extra edge, extra drive somehow. I hope I'm not being undiplomatic. Let me say this. I'll be undiplomatic. I think he had more smarts than some of the other members in the family. There's always one that stands out. And he had this immense drive, and maybe I think because he had that experience, that, you know, from that story, and Hari's father, Aron's grandfather, was not very healthy by this time. He was basically not the young dynamic guy, and so a lot fell on the shoulders of Dada George and Hari. They were the first two to be able to take even the responsibility of selling from the street. But then as time goes by, it's Hari that takes a few of the really significant steps. I mean, but this is way jumping after the war, where, you know, lots of Sindhi families are busy in tailoring and fabrics. The Harilelas break out. They go into hotels and property. I mean, that was led by Hari. And a lot of the rest of the family were saying, oh, don't be ridiculous, you know, tailoring is great. But, you know, Hari stuck his neck out, and I think we have to also bring in your mum sooner or later, because she's still a fantastic character, extremely strong, a very strong supporter of Hari all the way through all of this. And she came from, again, part of this whole broader Sindhi network, a more successful part of it, frankly. I mean, Hari, do you think that helped? I think Hari married up, you know, but there's no doubt, and honestly, your mum has even shared real love letters. This was a real love story for all the way through your two parents. I mean, you know, I'm a sort of cynical old bag, and I mean, I started sort of getting, oh, these people are lovely. Oh, it must be true. And, you know, you meet them and you hear all this stuff and you read the letters they write to each other, and I think it is true that, you know, it was a really important relationship those two had. But I mean, as for whether families are something specific to Hong Kong, I don't think so. I think they're specific to a time of migration and change wherever it's happening. And particularly I mean, I see Hong Kong as in its earlier years as a very cosmopolitan Asian port city. And people like the Harilelas, or like your, you know, Jewish clans, Armenians, Parsis, you know, all of these people are moving. They're turning up in Hong Kong and other places around Asia. They're having to rely on whatever they've got inside them, because they don't have much luggage. So
actually, to supplement that a little bit, I agree with Vaudine. At that time, families were very important everywhere. And to look at Dada George, my father's elder brother, even until his last few days, he would come over to, so we have apartments in this building, which each family, six or seven of the families actually occupied one apartment, one flat, one unit. And Dada George would come over every morning, and they would sit together, the two brothers, and have tea together. And when my father wanted to branch out into real estate, we had 900 tailors a day churning out 600 suits a day, and we had a great business at that time. So to be able to want to diversify into real estate, into tourism, at a time where we were doing great business was a big step. But he would not have done it without the support of his elder brother, Dada George, who had said, "Listen, I know, Hari, you want to do this. If we don't have the money, I will sell my wife's jewelry to support you to diversify in this." A lot of the other families said, you know, why would we take such a risk then? And the idea, my father was trading a lot of properties at the time. Dada George knew this. He was trading a lot of properties, and there was a central tenant belief in real estate and the opening up of tourism.
Could you talk about another turning point, which I think is the Cultural Revolution, where Hong Kong is in turmoil? There's a lot of concern whether Hong Kong will even continue to exist the same way. And it seems like your father makes a crucial decision amidst all the turmoil of the Cultural Revolution to commit to Hong Kong and to stay here and to build this expansion. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, I think it was a mixture of a few things. Firstly, my father was more Chinese and more Indian than he was Western. So he spoke Cantonese fluently. He used to tell me stories about going to his local Chinese friends who would give him a little bit extra rice, even if he didn't have the payment, so therefore he could go and sell the rice or eat at home. And so his belief in Hong Kong and China, rather than going back to some colonial India where they had no family, his father had already abandoned. We still have no family in India. So they were rooted in Hong Kong. They were rooted in the Indian Hong Kong and in the Chinese Hong Kong. And I think, honestly, at that time, there wasn't a huge amount of choice. They couldn't say they were going back to India. You were going back to the UK. There was no connection with the UK. So it was either I believe in Hong Kong, which he really strongly did, and it was a good time to buy properties, and so he doubled down when a lot of people were leaving.
Vaudine, could you talk a little bit about that? Because it seems that that's a turning point for Hong Kong, and that the role these families played symbolically or practically, was that part of what allowed Hong Kong to take the next step to become a great international city?
What I find really appealing, even from the very earliest days when the Harilelas first turned up with nothing and they're in this one room in Shanxi-Po, who helped them? Well, of course, it was their neighbors in the same building, right on the roof. And these neighbors are Chinese, some different kinds of Indians as well, but also and Portuguese. Exactly the kind of mix of peoples who had made Hong Kong what it is from the get-go, whether or not it was British or not. These people from around the region are all needing help similarly with, they were all poor, they were all living in one room in different buildings on, these sort of, now they look like gorgeous tenements, but then hovels. Your grandmother would meet people on the roof, because everyone's hanging out laundry on the roof of the 4 or 5 floor walk-up, and these people would help each other. And I thought, well, isn't that nice? All those kind of divisions that people like to find actually were not working necessarily in reality. People were, and I think that's why your father would say things like that he felt like a Hong Kongian. Maybe we'd now call it a Hong Konger, but this slice of Hong Kong life where, it's absolutely not the Guilo elite or the Chinese elite, it is the vast mass of normal people, which means Portuguese, Indian, Chinese, your Jews, the Armenians, and so on. And these people held it together. Sorry, they held an idea of their Hong Kong. Actually, in many ways, I think it's even more impressive that they held to that idea of Hong Kong all the way through World War II. And they came back after World War II and they made it their Hong Kong again. So, yeah.
So, Vaudine had also mentioned my mum, and there's a great story, actually. So when my father decided that he wanted to branch out into real estate and tourism, and we were doing a great tailoring business, they had a big fight amongst all the brothers. We were living, I wasn't born then, but we were living essentially in a building just half this building on Waterloo Road. And they came back and all the brothers were despondent and said, okay, we're gonna split and we'll have different businesses. And all the wives got together and they used to have breakfast, lunch and dinner in the same room every single day. And they sat in that room and they said, all right, boys, you can leave, but we're staying. And since then, apparently, they all laughed, and what can you do with that? And hence, we stayed together and grew the business.
Can you tell us the story of this home, of this house? Because I think it's symbolic of your family, but I'm wondering kind of how that decision was made and how everyone gets along living under the same roof.
So I was born in this house. I was the first one who was born in this house. 52 years ago, we moved into this house. We used to have half this house, but we decided. My father decided actually he wanted to build a house for the whole family. But unlike the older house where they ate breakfast, lunch, and dinner together, each family would have its own flat, its own apartment, with their own small kitchenette. He believed they would still eat dinner here together. And for many, many years, I mean, right now, a lot of my father and his brothers have passed away. A lot of the family have grown older, but for many years, Sunday night in this room was 70 to 100 people, every Sunday night. Right? There would be a lot of whiskey. Monday morning would not feel good. Indians like whiskey, as you saw earlier today. But he decided that after that conversation where the wife said, all right, you guys can go wherever you want, but we're staying, that was a monumental pivot to say, okay, we're going to stay together, and how do we stay together for the long term? Not one generation, but 2, 3. So I'm, depending on how you look at it, if you take my paternal grandfather as the first generation, I'm generation 3. But if you take the people who were born here, I'm generation 2. So we're either 4 or 5 generations here in Hong Kong. And we on Saturday we have a birthday party over a 3-year-old where we were having snacks and a little bit of food, and we'll all be there. And there'll be 50 or 60 family members, and maybe 3 children. But it was a pivotal decision to say, all right, we're staying together as a family, we're going to do tailoring, we're going to do real estate, we're going to do it all, and we're going to stay together as a family. And there's strength in that unity.
I wonder, Vaudine, if you could talk a little bit about that. I mean, you're an economics correspondent, you've covered business for a long time. Is there something about the family staying together, no matter how extended it gets, that fuels the business success?
I think the answer to that is yes and no. You're talking to someone who comes from a deeply dysfunctional family. Some families work and some don't. That seems to me difficult to kind of generalize about. There are other family companies I have been happy to research and write about. The Greens from Arnhold's trading company. And I think in every case that I've researched or written about, there often comes a moment like the one that Aron is describing, where there's a sort of crunch moment where, so is the son going to take it on or not, or do we sell up? But I mean, that applies to all kinds of families. It applies to my husband's family, who, he's the first not to take on the farm. So slightly less at stake, perhaps. But the moment of, I mean, first of all, you need a leading personality. And I think it's clear that with Hari, you have a leading personality who has ideas and is prepared to go for them. And then that whole support network, which, can fall apart at times, but luckily in this case, as you were describing, is pulled together by the women. But sometimes it just means that, the next generation is, I mean, this Chinese thing that the third generation is supposed to be a bit of a disaster. And of course, or second, I think third, yeah. But of course we all know families where that's not the case, and, where the third generation guy is brilliant. So I don't think we can generalize about these things. And I'm sure there are business consultants in this room who will know of companies who work much better when the family's just not there. But I guess it depends on the guys, doesn't it?
Actually, I think for my particular family, and I'm possibly the wrong person to say this, because to get me into a temple or a religious place of worship, you'd need to drag me by the hair. But it was religion to a great degree. I was saying to Amir recently, he said, so what do you think? I said, listen, I don't do my religion, I'm not doing anybody else's. Right? But to a great degree, it was religion. When I was at primary school, my grandmother, who was still alive, she passed away when I was 5. She used to have a ritual that we had to get up in the morning, not eat or not drink. You could drink water. You had to have a shower. Even at 3, 4, 5 years old, you had to have a shower. And then you'd go into the prayer room, which we have upstairs. And if anybody's interested, I'm happy to take a little round and show the prayer room, which is quite interesting. We'd have to light an incense, go from one side to the other, and pick up our 50-cent coin in those days, which we'd take to school and buy an ice cream or whatever we bought. Or we kept, as good Cindy children, keeping our pockets for when we're 50 years old. So religion, to a great degree, kept, and spirituality kept to a great degree my family.
I'd like to, if it's okay, invite the audience to ask some questions. So if you can think of those. But let me ask one last question for my part, which is, your father clearly had this vision of Hong Kong and of Hong Kong's growth and so forth. What was it that he saw in Hong Kong that encouraged him to double down, to build the Holiday Inn, to sort of continue in a way where other people were too reticent, would have stayed in clothing, say, for example? What was it that he saw in Hong Kong, and what was unique about Hong Kong in your years growing up here, and for him?
I think he saw an internationalism, an entrepreneurism, and he just believed in the place. He believed in the politics. He believed in the modernism. If you knew my father, before I had a computer, he had a computer. Right? He had a camera before, a digital camera. He was always trying to look for the new thing. He was always very, very, very interested in all the things that came out. He would spend hours on his computer when I had no idea what to do with mine. And I was young in those days, so I think he saw the technology, the modernism of Hong Kong. The Holiday Inn is actually an interesting story, because he started building it in the 60s, and he had external shareholders. There were quite a few external shareholders. He didn't obviously have the money to build the whole thing. During the Red Guard coming into Hong Kong, every single one of his external shareholders said, I want out. And he said, I don't have the money to buy you out. Right? In those days, the budget to build the hotel was 45 million Hong Kong dollars. And he said, I don't have the money to buy you out. He said, I want a ballroom. They were digging with hand. They couldn't have dynamite to actually go down into the basement because of the neighboring buildings. So they dug by hand. The biggest typhoon in Hong Kong, Typhoon Rose, happened, completely flooded the basement excavation. And the budget went from 45 million to 145 million, which was massive. And he said, I just don't have this money. So he went to the then chairman of the Hong Kong Shanghai Bank, who's now, he's passed away, Sir Michael Sandberg, and said, I need 5 million Hong Kong dollars. And Michael Sandberg said, what can you give me for it? You can give me a house in Kowloon, the previous house. He said, I will never mortgage my house, and I will never mortgage my office. I have nothing to give you. And Michael Sandberg said, okay, give me your signature. Right? In today's age, maybe that may mean a guarantee or something. In those days, it was a signature. There was no collateral against it. And Michael Sandberg gave him $5 million. He paid out his external shareholders, doubled down in Hong Kong during the Red Guard coming over here, and finally built the hotel. We opened the hotel in 1975. The morning that we opened the hotel, his mother passed away. And I was 4 or 5 years old, And he sent me to cut the ribbon. I had no idea what was going on, right? So I knew what I was going to do. So I went to cut the ribbon of this new 620-room hotel with a big ballroom at 4 years old. No clue what was going on. But it was Michael Sandberg who helped him, his belief in Hong Kong, and the weird tragedy that had happened because he had always dreamt of building a hotel. Bought this piece of land, had it from the 60s, built it, went through the Red Guard coming in, the typhoon routes, and then his mother passes away day of. So it was, we always say that is a hotel that will never sell because it's really important to us in so many different ways.
Can I invite anyone from the audience who'd like to ask a question? I'll repeat it for the, oh great, okay.
Fascinating, really fascinating. Did he use astrologers?
He did not. He did not.
Interesting, because I think the portent from all of those disasters all around the world.
No, he did not. He was very religious. He prayed every day, but he did not deal with ritual at all. So, for example, when he passed away, the Sindhis do 12 days of mourning, and the body's there, and we pray, and we don't eat meat, and we do all that stuff. He's in his will. He said, "I do not want 12 days. I want 4 days, like 3 or 4 days, like the Sikhs do it. I think it's ridiculous. I want your mother to wear colorful clothes as opposed to white. All the jewelry I bought her all throughout our lives, I want her to wear it. Aron, I want you to take it in his letter of wishes. Aron, I want you to take her for dinner as much as you can take her for dinner." So he didn't want her an old-fashioned Indian widow sitting at home like this. He did not believe in the astrologers. He did not believe in that kind of stuff in Hinduism. He was very religious. Did not believe in any part of the ritual. Yes.
Hi Aron, I was wondering that it's probably just a philosophical thing, you can share your ideas. Are those who didn't live at this time, are we going to be rewarded, hopefully, like the ones who didn't live in 67? Because I feel like so many ran to Singapore and those who stayed should be rewarded, that's why. Thank you. And second is, do you think, on a more serious note, that you opening Hari during, I don't know, monk protests, COVID, you opening Hari is kind of like a tribute to what your dad did in 75. Thank you.
Vaudine, can you answer that? Sorry. So are we going to be rewarded? Pauline was with the government before, so so no, I think Hong Kong will certainly prosper. I think there's no question about it. It's a very special place. If we can get through the bureaucracy and the red tape and all the pleasing that we've done over the last 3 years, our government has told us it's scientific that we have herd immunity. But by the way, keep on your mask, and by the way, double mask, and by the way, just don't ever take them off, right? It just doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. So you have to have trust in the government, which for the last 3 years, and in process before, needs to actually earn your trust. But I think it's a very special place. The many people who have gone to the UK, have gone to Singapore, are coming back. Right, because it's a spectacular place. Right? There are things to do business-wise. People are quick. People are fast on their feet. They're entrepreneurial. There's great things to do leisure-wise. Jim has seen me play golf, and he wouldn't say I would play golf, but anyway, you can climb mountains. You can go to the beaches. It's a spectacular place. Is it a tribute to my father, the Hari? I think there's no question about that. But it wasn't just for my father's name. It was a mixture of reasons that I created a brand called the Hari. Firstly, if you take the name Hari Harilela, it's half of that. Secondly, and equally importantly, there are a lot of brands that have come out of Hong Kong that are internationally known as the best service anywhere. You see the Peninsula, the Mandarin, the Rosewood, Overlook hotels, right? And I think the Shangri-La hotels, I can keep on naming them. The Langham, you can keep on naming them. And I think to be able to actually take this brand internationally is something I'd like to do. My father started the business, so yes, it is a tribute to him to a certain extent. I remember when I told him we're going to get £300 on our rate in London. He was like, "Who's going to pay £300 for a room?" But you know, we achieved it before he passed away, and he was quite shocked. But yes, we have to. I mean, the intention of the group is to take our own brand in a multifaceted world of hotel brand diversification.
Which is not dissimilar to the question that was asked. I mean, the question I was going to ask was if your father was alive today and he was facing the renaissance of Hong Kong, what do you think he would be doing?
I think he would certainly double down on Hong Kong. I think there's no question about it. I mean, we have so many good things going for us. We have the Greater Bay Area, which is certainly going to put us on, if we can be the nerve center of the Greater Bay Area, which we will be, Hong Kong is just going to go from strength to strength. Not related to the book at all, but I think what's happened recently where the West confiscating Russian goods, houses and they can't travel, I think the mainland Chinese who have a lot of money who'd like to invest elsewhere are going to say, I can't go to the West because we could be the Russians one day, and I think a lot of money is going to come to Hong Kong. So yes, I'm a firm believer in Hong Kong. We opened the Hari in December 2020, right at the heart of, we had 2 people per table, we had to close dinners at 6 o'clock. And I still said, you know what, this place is going to absolutely rock it. I was there for breakfast on last week during the Jewelry Fair, and I walked in at 8:30 in the morning, and every single seat was taken with non-locals, which means non-staycationers. Because we had 3 days of staycations, and they'd come from Europe. There were Austrians there, there were Israelis there. There was a Brazilian. There was a guy in shorts, and he had a cup with a straw, with a metal straw in it. Which in Argentina you drink something called yerba mate, which is hot water with a little bit of herb with a straw that you share. So I walked up to him. I walked up to him and I said, "Are you Argentinian? Because it's that yerba mate." He's like, "No, I'm Brazilian." And he had the most horrible gas tank looking, massive blue. He was pouring that in his big cup. I said, "So are you Argentinian? And what are you doing here if you're Argentinian?" He goes, "No, the Argentinians drink the mate. It's hot. We Brazilians drink it when it's cold." So I said, "You're a Brazilian. You've come all the way to Hong Kong for the jewelry fair." He goes, "Yes, I have." Right, and so that means people are coming back from all over the world. So it is turning, and it's turning very quickly. If you just see London, New York, Singapore, Thailand, what have you, when they lifted their COVID restrictions, they turned up quickly, and we have a lot more to offer here.
And you never closed the hotel? You didn't go into the hotel?
No.
Actually, some of this talk reminds me of something that we've slightly forgotten to mention about Hari himself. I mean, first, you mentioned briefly the internationalism that was extremely important to Hari, and I think also marked him out from many others in the Sindhi world, if I may be blunt. You know, Hari was extremely fond of having friends from all different communities, and as you can see with his son, even knowing their drinks. You know, a day in the life of Hari and Mimi would involve meeting people from all around the world in a constant succession. And actually, one of the most astounding things about Aron's mum, as she remembers when she imagined this girls, she would, between appointments, you know, a cocktail and a dinner and a reception and, you know, several events, she would change her sari in the car on the way to the next thing. Imagine it. That for some reason is stuck in my mind. But the other point that we're kind of forgetting about Hari, which says something about the way Hong Kong was then. Here's a guy with very little education, nothing behind him, who was making his way up. From about the 1960s onwards, he was also suddenly on all sorts of public committees. He became a man of public affairs. And so, you know, there's a whole, I find it fascinating as a sort of analytical process to see how do you get up in the world. Well, you start with Rotary, and you learn how that goes, and you learn how to organize speakers and how to be a speaker. You start doing a lot of charity of often causes that he genuinely cared about. I mean, this was a guy who was incredibly active in things like the Girl Guides, and he would be at every prize giving, and he would be out there as a man of the community, engaging in a lot of extremely diverse, mostly philanthropic, either educational, but also civic duties, because here's this rare thing. An Indian entrepreneur who speaks Cantonese, so he's in the local Kai Phong Association in Tsim Sha Tsui for years and years. He's part of all sorts of Chinese committees of Hong Kong, and then of course on British government committees, in urban council affairs and so on, and on and on. So it wasn't that he was just doing business, he was engaged in the wider public life of this place. And you know, there were possibilities for a man like him to do that, which I think is a really interesting aspect of Hong Kong in the late 20th century, if I may say that. But yeah, so I'm sure he would still be engaged now, and he was, of course, until his death only in 2014. Yes.
Well, it's a wonderful book. I think we're going to stop now and give everyone a chance to get their book signed. But thank you so much for sharing these stories and your wonderful home with us.
And anybody who wants to ask Jonathan about his book.
On behalf of the Hong Kong International Literary Festival, thanks again for your support, and please help yourself